Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. And now let's dive into the story. Chapter 1, The Man Who Knew My Name. Birdie Matthews stood at her husband's graveside wearing a black dress that cost more than her first car and shoes that pinched her feet like they had a personal grudge. At 58 years old, she'd buried her parents, 2 siblings, and now Raymond, her husband of 40 years. The Detroit summer sun beat down on the crowd of mourners like it was personally offended by their grief. Birdie's daughter Tameka stood on her left, dabbing at her eyes with tissue. Her son Marcus stood on her right, stone-faced and silent, and scattered around them were her 4 grandchildren, Destiny, Jamal, Kiara, and little Ray, all looking lost and confused. Raymond had been their hero, the man who fixed everything, who had a joke for every occasion, who snuck them candy when their parents weren't looking, and now he was gone. Heart attack at 62. No warning, just gone. Birdie felt like someone had hollowed her out with a spoon and left nothing but an empty shell standing at this grave. Then she saw him, a white man with silver hair and kind eyes, standing away from the crowd under an oak tree, watching her with an expression she couldn't name. He wore a simple black suit that looked worn but respectable, and he held his hat in his hands like he was at church. Birdie frowned. She knew everyone at this funeral. Raymond's family, her family, friends from the plant where Raymond had worked for 35 years, neighbors from the block they'd lived on since 1987. But this man, she'd never seen him before in her life. He didn't fit, didn't belong. And the way he looked at her, not with pity like everyone else, but with something deeper, something that felt like recognition, made her stomach flip. Birdie's best friend LaVonda leaned in close and whispered, "Girl, who is that white man staring at you like he knows your secrets?" Birdie shook her head slowly. "I don't know, but I'm about to find out." The service ended and people started to scatter. Some headed to their cars, others clustered in groups, talking in low voices about what a good man Raymond had been. Birdie's children tried to guide her toward the limousine, but she pulled away. "Y'all go on ahead, I'll catch up." Tameka frowned. "Mama, you sure? You shouldn't be alone right now." Birdie gave her daughter a look that said she wasn't asking for permission. "I said I'll catch up." She watched her family walk away, then turned toward the oak tree. The man was still there, waiting. As Birdie approached, he straightened up, his face a mixture of nervousness and determination. "Mrs. Matthews," he said, his voice deep and gentle, "I'm sorry for your loss." Birdie stopped a few feet away, her arms crossed. "You got me at a disadvantage. You know my name, but I don't know yours." The man extended his hand. "Daniel Sullivan, Danny. I worked with Raymond at the plant. Night shift supervisor." Birdie stared at his hand for a long moment before shaking it. His grip was warm and firm. "Raymond never mentioned you." Danny's smile was sad. "No, I don't suppose he would have. We weren't exactly friends. More like ships passing in the night, different shifts, different departments. But I knew him, and I knew about you." Birdie's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" Danny glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Mrs. Matthews, I need to talk to you about Raymond, about something that happened at the plant, something that might explain why he died." The words hit Birdie like a slap. "The doctor said it was a heart attack. Natural causes." Danny's jaw tightened. "That's what they want you to think, but Raymond came to me 3 weeks before he died. He was scared. Said he'd found something at the plant that could get him killed, and then..." He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Birdie felt the ground tilt under her feet. Her vision went spotty, and she grabbed Danny's arm to steady herself. "What are you saying? Did somebody kill my husband?" Danny's face was grim. I'm saying there's more to this than a simple heart attack. And if you want the truth, if you want justice for Raymond, you need to listen to me. Birdie's mind was racing. This didn't make sense. Raymond worked at an auto parts plant. He'd been there for decades. What could he have possibly found that would get him killed? She looked at Danny, this stranger who'd appeared at her husband's funeral with wild claims and serious eyes, and felt something in her gut. Fear, but also something else. Curiosity, anger, the need to know. "When can we talk?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Danny reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "Call me tonight after your family leaves. What I have to tell you, you'll want to hear it alone." Birdie took the card, her hand shaking. "If you're lying to me, if this is some kind of scam..." "It's not," Danny interrupted. "I promise you, Mrs. Matthews, everything I'm about to tell you is the truth, and it's going to change everything." Birdie stared at the card, then at Danny, then back at the card. Her whole body was trembling now. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, wanted to wake up from this nightmare, but she couldn't, because somewhere deep in her soul, she knew Danny was telling the truth. Raymond had been acting strange those last few weeks, coming home late, jumping at sudden noises, holding her a little too tight when he kissed her goodbye. She thought it was stress, thought he was just tired from all those years of hard work. But what if it was something more? What if her husband had been in danger and she'd been too blind to see it? Birdie looked up at Danny, tears streaming down her face. "Who killed my husband?" Danny's expression was pained. "Call me tonight, I'll tell you everything." And then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the cemetery like a ghost. Birdie stood there alone, the business card clutched in her hand, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She looked at Raymond's grave, the fresh dirt, the flowers already wilting in the heat, and made a promise. "I'm gonna find out the truth, baby. I swear to God, I'm gonna find out what happened to you." And she meant it. Chapter 2, 40 Years of Love. Birdie met Raymond Matthews in 1983 at a house party on Detroit's west side, where the music was loud, the drinks were strong, and the dancing didn't stop until the sun came up. She was 18, fresh out of high school, working at a hair salon on 6 Mile Road and dreaming of bigger things. He was 22, working at the auto parts plant and trying to save enough money to buy his mama a house. He asked her to dance, and she said yes. That was it. That was the beginning of everything. Raymond wasn't the finest man at the party, not by a long shot, but he had something that others didn't: confidence without arrogance, kindness without weakness. And when he smiled at Birdie, she felt like she was the only woman in the world. They dated for 6 months before Raymond proposed. Nothing fancy. Just the two of them sitting on the steps of her mama's house, eating ice cream on a hot summer night, when he turned to her and said, "Birdie, I ain't got much, but I got love, and I swear I'll spend the rest of my life making you happy." Birdie said yes before he even finished talking. They got married at Greater Emmanuel Baptist Church with 200 people crammed into pews meant for 150. Birdie wore her mama's wedding dress, altered to fit her curves. Raymond wore a suit he bought on layaway. And when the preacher said, "You may kiss the bride," Raymond dipped her low and kissed her so hard the whole church erupted in applause and laughter. The first years were hard. Money was tight. They lived in a 1-bedroom apartment where the heat barely worked and the neighbors fought so loud you could hear it through the walls. Raymond worked double shifts, coming home exhausted, his hands rough and calloused. Birdie worked at the salon during the day and cleaned offices at night. They were building something, building a life. And then Tameka was born. Tiny, perfect, with Raymond's eyes and Birdie's smile. 2 years later came Marcus, and suddenly Birdie wasn't just a wife, she was a mama. And Raymond wasn't just a husband, he was a father, and he was good at it, the best. Raymond worked his way up at the plant, from assembly line worker to quality control inspector to shift supervisor, the money got better. They bought a house in 1987, a small brick ranch with a yard and a garage and enough space for their growing family. Birdie quit the salon and started doing hair from home, building a clientele of church ladies and young girls who wanted their hair pressed and curled for prom. Life was good, not perfect. They had their struggles, bills that came due before paychecks arrived, arguments about money and in-laws and whose turn it was to deal with the kids, but they had love. Real, deep, unshakable love. Raymond was her partner, her best friend, the man who knew all her flaws and loved her anyway. And Birdie was his rock. The woman who kept the house running, who raised their children, who held him when the weight of the world got too heavy. They were a team. For 40 years, they were a team. But something changed in the months before Raymond died. He started coming home later, his face drawn and tired. He stopped laughing at Birdie's jokes, stopped reaching for her hand when they watched TV, stopped being present. Birdie asked him what was wrong. Just work stuff, he'd say. Don't worry about it. But Birdie did worry. She'd been married to this man for 4 decades. She knew when something was off. One night, about 2 weeks before he died, Birdie woke up to find Raymond sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window. "Baby, what's wrong?" she whispered. Raymond didn't turn around. "If something happens to me, I need you to be strong. For the kids, for the grandkids, you hear me?" Birdie's stomach dropped. Raymond, you're scaring me. What's going on?" He finally turned, and the look in his eyes broke her heart. Fear, raw, bone-deep fear. "Just promise me, Bird. Promise me you'll be strong." She promised, but she didn't understand. Not until the day Marcus called her screaming that Raymond had collapsed at work and the paramedics couldn't revive him. Not until she stood in the hospital hallway being told her husband was dead. Not until she buried him in mid-Danny Sullivan. The night of the funeral, after everyone had left and the house was finally quiet, Birdie sat in her kitchen with a cup of coffee and Danny's business card. Her hand shook as she dialed the number. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Matthews." "It's Birdie, and if you're going to tell me my husband was murdered, you better have proof." Danny's voice was steady. "I do. Can I come over?" Birdie hesitated. It was late. She was alone. She didn't know this man, but something in his voice, something honest and pain, made her say yes. 30 minutes later, Danny Sullivan was sitting at her kitchen table, a thick folder spread out in front of him. "Raymond came to me 3 weeks before he died," Danny began. "He discovered that the plant was dumping toxic waste illegally, not just a little, massive amounts, into the Detroit River. He had proof, manifests, invoices, photographs. He wanted to go to the EPA, blow the whole thing open." Birdie felt her blood run cold. "And they killed him for it?" Danny nodded. "I think so, but I can't prove it yet." Chapter 3, The Evidence in the Basement. Birdie stared at the documents spread across her kitchen table, her mind struggling to process what Danny was telling her. Invoices for chemicals that were never properly disposed of. Photos Raymond had taken with his phone, showing barrels being loaded onto trucks in the middle of the night. Emails between plant management discussing problem materials and alternative disposal methods. It was all there. Evidence that the plant Raymond had worked at for 35 years had been poisoning the city. And her husband had found out. "Why didn't he tell me?" Birdie whispered, her voice cracking. "Why didn't he come home and say something?" Danny's expression was sympathetic. "He was trying to protect you. He knew this was dangerous, knew the people involved had money and power. He wanted to build an airtight case before he brought you into it." Birdie slammed her hand on the table, making the coffee cups jump. "I was his wife for 40 years. He should have trusted me." Danny didn't flinch. "He did trust you. That's why he told me that if anything happened to him, I should give you this." He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Birdie's name was written on the front in Raymond's handwriting. Birdie's hands trembled as she took the envelope. She opened it slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. Inside was a letter. My dearest Bird, if you're reading this, I'm gone. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you what I was into, but I couldn't risk them coming after you or the kids or the grandbabies. I found something bad, Bird. Real bad. The plant's been dumping chemicals for years, and people are getting sick. Kids in the neighborhood got cancer. Old folks dying from stuff that don't make sense. It's all connected to what they're doing. I got proof. Danny knows where it is. Trust him, Bird. I know that sounds crazy, but he's a good man. He's the only one I could trust with this. And I need you to finish what I started. Go to the EPA. Go to the news. Make them pay for what they did. I love you. Always have. Always will. Ray. Birdie's vision blurred with tears. She read the letter 3 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. Raymond had known he was in danger, and he'd still kept going, still fought to expose the truth, and now he was dead. Birdie looked up at Danny, her eyes red and swollen. Yep, where's the rest of the evidence? Danny's voice was quiet. Raymond said he hid it somewhere safe, somewhere only you would think to look. Birdie's mind raced, somewhere only she would think to look. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. The basement, come on. She led Danny down the narrow stairs to the basement, a cluttered space filled with 40 years of accumulated life, old furniture, boxes of Christmas decorations, Marcus's high school trophies, Tameka's prom dress. Birdie went straight to the back corner where Raymond kept his tools. Behind the workbench was a metal filing cabinet. Birdie pulled it open and rifled through the drawers until she found what she was looking for. A lockbox. She didn't have the key, so she grabbed a hammer and smashed the lock. Inside was a flash drive, a stack of photographs, and another letter. This one addressed to the EPA. Birdie's hand shook as she held the flash drive. This is it, Danny nodded. That's everything, enough to shut the plant down and put people in prison. Birdie felt a surge of something powerful. Rage, grief, determination. Then let's do it. But before they could move, Birdie's phone rang. It was Tameka. Mama, where you at? I came by to check on you and the door's unlocked. Birdie's stomach dropped. She'd been so focused on the evidence she'd forgotten to lock the door. I'm in the basement, baby. I'll be right up. She hung up and looked at Danny. You need to go. My daughter can't see you here. Not yet. Not until I figure out how to explain all this. Danny nodded and headed for the basement door that led to the backyard. Call me tomorrow. We need to move fast on this. I will, Birdie promised. Danny paused at the door. Birdie, I need you to know, Raymond was a good man, and he died trying to do the right thing. Don't let that be for nothing. I won't, Birdie said, her voice hard as steel, and she meant it. Danny disappeared into the night, and Birdie climbed the stairs to face her daughter. Tameka was standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, looking suspicious. Mama, what's going on? And why you look like you've been crying? Birdie set the lockbox on the table and sat down, suddenly exhausted. Baby, I need to tell you something about your daddy, about why he really died. Tameka's face went pale. What are you talking about? Birdie told her everything about Danny, about the plant, about the evidence Raymond had collected, about the letter. By the time she finished, Tameka was crying, her hands covering her mouth. Oh my God, Daddy was murdered. I think so, Birdie said quietly, and I'm gonna prove it. Tameka shook her head. Mama, no, this is too dangerous. If they kill Daddy, they'll kill you too. Birdie reached across the table and grabbed her daughter's hand. Baby, listen to me. Your daddy died trying to protect people, trying to stop something evil. I can't just let that go. I won't. Tameka's voice was desperate. What about us? What about the grandkids? We need you, Mama. Birdie's heart ached, I know, and I'm not going anywhere. But I gotta do this. For Ray, for the people getting sick, for what's right. Tameka stared at her mother for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Okay, but I'm helping you, and so is Marcus. We're doing this together. Birdie felt tears spring to her eyes. You sure? Tameka stood and pulled her mother into a tight hug. Daddy was our hero, and if this is what he died for, then we're going to finish it as a family. Birdie held her daughter close, feeling the weight of 40 years of love and loss pressing down on her. But she also felt something else: strength, purpose, the knowledge that she wasn't alone. That night, after Tameka left, Birdie sat in her bedroom looking at a photo of Raymond. It was from their 30th anniversary, just the two of them, dressed up fancy, smiling at the camera like they had all the time in the world. "I'm gonna make this right, baby," she whispered. "I promise." She placed the photo back on her nightstand, next to the lockbox with the flash drive. Then she picked up her phone and called Danny. "Tomorrow," she said when he answered. "We go to the EPA tomorrow." Danny's voice was full of respect. "You're a strong woman, Birdie Matthews." Birdie smiled through her tears. "I had a strong man teaching me for 40 years. And as she lay in bed that night, in the house she'd shared with Raymond, Birdie felt him beside her. Not as a ghost, but as a presence. A reminder that love didn't end with death, and that sometimes the greatest way to honor someone was to finish what they started. Chapter 4. The meeting that changed everything. The EPA office in downtown Detroit was a gray building that looked like it had been designed to crush hope. Birdie walked through the doors with Danny by her side, Marcus and Tameka flanking her like bodyguards. She wore her Sunday best, a navy blue dress and heels that made her feet scream, because she wanted these people to take her seriously. She was a 58-year-old black grandmother from the West Side, and she knew exactly how people like this saw women like her. But today, she had something they couldn't ignore: proof. They were escorted to a conference room where two agents waited, a young black woman named Agent Harper and an older white man named Agent Brennan. Both looked tired and skeptical. "Mrs. Matthews," Agent Harper said, gesturing to chairs, "we understand you have information about illegal dumping at the West Side Auto Parts plant." Birdie sat down and placed the lockbox on the table. "My husband, worked at that plant for 35 years. 3 weeks ago, he discovered they were dumping toxic waste into the Detroit River. He collected evidence, and then he died." She opened the lockbox and pulled out the flash drive. "This is everything. Invoices, photos, videos, names, dates. Everything you need to shut them down." Agent Brennan raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Matthews, your husband died of a heart attack. The medical examiner's report was clear." Marcus leaned forward, his voice hard. "My father was 62 years old. He ran 3 miles every morning, didn't smoke, barely drank. And he dropped dead 2 weeks after telling someone at the plant he had this evidence. You really think that's a coincidence?" Agent Harper took the flash drive and plugged it into her laptop. For several minutes, she clicked through files, her expression growing more serious with each passing second. Finally, she looked up. "No, this is extensive." "It's everything," Danny said. "Raymond spent months putting this together. He knew it was dangerous, and he did it anyway, because people are dying." Agent Brennan leaned back in his chair. "Even if everything on this drive is accurate, and I'm not saying it is, we'd need more than documents to prove murder. We'd need a witness, someone who can testify that Raymond Matthews was killed to silence him." Birdie felt her stomach drop. "So you're saying even with all this evidence, you won't do anything?" Agent Harper held up a hand. "That's not what he's saying. We'll investigate the dumping. That alone is enough to bring charges. But a murder investigation, that requires concrete proof." Tameka's voice was sharp. "So the people who killed our father just get away with it?" Agent Brennan's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss, truly. But without proof of foul play, our hands are tied." Birdie stood abruptly, her hands shaking with rage. "Y'all are scared. That's what this is. The plant's owned by some big corporation with lawyers and money, and y'all don't want to touch it." Agent Harper stood too. "Mrs. Matthews, that's not fair." "Fair? Birdie's voice cracked. "My husband is dead. Kids in my neighborhood got cancer. And you're sitting here telling me there's nothing you can do? That ain't fair." There was a long, tense silence. Then Agent Harper spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Give us 48 hours to review everything on this drive. If there's actionable evidence, we'll move. I promise you that." Birdie stared at her, searching her face for any sign of deception. But all she saw was sincerity. 48 hours, Birdie said. "And then I'm going to the news?" Agent Harper nodded. "That's your right." As they left the building, Marcus put his arm around his mother. "You okay, Mama?" Birdie shook her head. "No, but I will be, once we get justice." They went to a diner across the street, a greasy spoon with cracked vinyl booths and coffee that tasted like it had been made yesterday. Birdie sat next to Danny, her children across from them, and tried to process everything. "What if they don't do anything?" Tameka asked, her voice small. "What if we went through all this and they just bury it?" Danny's voice was steady. "Then we go to the media. We go to community organizers. We make enough noise that they can't ignore it." Birdie looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something stir in her chest. This man had shown up at her husband's funeral and turned her whole world upside down. But he'd also given her something she desperately needed. The truth, and a way to fight back. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "You didn't have to get involved. You could have just kept your head down." Danny met her eyes. "Because Raymond trusted me, and because it's the right thing to do." Marcus studied Danny with narrowed eyes. "You got family?" Danny shook his head. "Not anymore. My wife died 8 years ago. Cancer. No kids, just me." Birdie felt a pang of sympathy. "I'm sorry." Danny gave a sad smile. "Me too. But it taught me something. Life's too short to stay quiet when you see something wrong." Tameka's phone rang and she stepped away to answer it. When she came back, her face was pale. "That was Agent Harper. She wants us to come back. Now." They piled back into Marcus's car and drove to the EPA office, Birdie's heart pounding the whole way. Agent Harper met them at the door, her expression grim. "We need to talk. Privately." She led them to the same conference room and closed the door. "I've reviewed the flash drive. What your husband found, it's worse than we thought. The dumping has been going on for over a decade. We're talking millions of gallons of toxic waste. And the corporation that owns the plant, they knew. There are emails from executives authorizing it." Birdie felt like she'd been punched. "So what now?" Agent Harper leaned forward. "We're opening a full investigation into the dumping and into Raymond's death. But I need you to understand this is going to get ugly. The company will fight back. They'll hire investigators to dig into your life, your family, Raymond's past. They'll try to discredit you." Marcus' voice was hard. "Let them try." Agent Harper nodded. "There's something else. We found security footage from the plant. The night before Raymond died, he was confronted in the parking lot by 2 men. We're trying to identify them, but it's clear the confrontation was heated." Birdie's blood ran cold. "They threatened him. It looks that way. And if we can identify those men and tie them to the company, we might have enough for a murder charge." Birdie felt tears streaming down her face. Raymond had been threatened, had known he was in danger, and he'd still gone to work the next day because he was trying to protect his family, trying not to scare them. I want to see the footage," Birdie said. Agent Harper hesitated. "Mrs. Matthews, I don't think—" "I need to see it," Birdie interrupted, her voice firm. "I need to know what my husband went through." Agent Harper finally nodded and pulled up the video on her laptop. Birdie watched, her heart breaking as Raymond walked to his car and 2 men in suits approached him. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see Raymond's body language, tense, defensive. One of the men grabbed his arm and Raymond yanked it away. Then the men left, and Raymond stood alone in the parking lot, his head bowed. He looked so tired, so scared. Birdie's sobs came in waves, and Danny put a hand on her shoulder, steady and comforting. "He was so brave," she whispered. "So damn brave." Agent Harper's voice was gentle. "We're going to find out who those men are, and we're going to make sure they pay for what they did." Birdie nodded, wiping her eyes. "Thank you." As they left the office for the second time that day, Birdie felt something she hadn't felt since Raymond died. Hope. It was fragile and small, but it was there. That evening, Danny drove Birdie home. Her children had left to pick up the grandkids from school. And for the first time all day, Birdie was alone with this man who'd become so central to her life in just a few short days. "You want to come in for some coffee?" she asked. Danny smiled. "I'd like that." They sat on Birdie's porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood, the same neighborhood where she'd raised her children and watched her grandchildren grow. "Thank you," Birdie said quietly. "For everything, for caring, for fighting." Danny looked at her, his eyes soft. "You don't have to thank me, Birdie. This is what people should do for each other." And in that moment, sitting on her porch with this kind, steady man, Birdie felt something she thought she'd never feel again. Connection. Not love. Not yet. But the beginning of something. Something that felt like maybe, just maybe, life wasn't over. That maybe there was still more ahead. And that Raymond, wherever he was, would want her to keep living, keep fighting, keep loving, even if it looked different than before. Chapter 5, When the Past Fights Back. 2 days after their meeting with the EPA, Birdie's life became a battlefield. The news broke that morning. A local reporter had gotten wind of the investigation and ran a story. Widow claims husband murdered over toxic dumping evidence. By noon, Birdie's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, neighbors, people from church. Everyone wanted to know if it was true, if Raymond had really been killed. Birdie sat at her kitchen table staring at her phone, feeling overwhelmed. Tameka and Marcus were there trying to field calls and protect their mama from the chaos. And Danny had shown up without being asked, bringing groceries and a calm presence that Birdie desperately needed. "You should probably stay off social media for a while," Marcus said, scrolling through his phone with a disgusted expression. "People are saying all kinds of crazy things." Birdie didn't want to know, but curiosity got the better of her. "What are they saying?" Marcus hesitated. "Some folks are calling you a hero, but others, they're saying you're making it up, that you're just a grieving widow looking for attention and money." Birdie felt like she'd been slapped. "Money? They think I'm doing this for money?" Tameka reached across the table and squeezed her mother's hand. "Ignore them, Mama. They don't know you. They don't know what Daddy did." But it was hard to ignore. By evening, news vans were parked outside Birdie's house. Reporters knocked on her door, shouting questions through the woods. "Mrs. Matthews, do you believe your husband was murdered?" "Mrs. Matthews, what do you say to people who claim you're lying?" "Mrs. Matthews, have you been offered a settlement from the plant?" Birdie pulled the curtains closed and sat in her darkened living room, feeling like a prisoner in her own home. Danny sat beside her on the couch, his presence steady and reassuring. "This is going to get worse before it gets better," he said quietly. "The company's going to come after you hard. They'll dig up everything they can to make you look bad." Birdie turned to him, exhaustion written all over her face. "Let them. I got nothing to hide." But she was wrong. The next morning, a lawyer showed up at her door. Smooth, expensive suit, fake smile. "Mrs. Matthews, my name is Richard Caldwell. I represent Midwest Industrial Holdings, the parent company of Westside Auto Parts. We'd like to speak with you about your allegations." Birdie crossed her arms. "I got nothing to say to you." Caldwell's smile didn't waver. "We understand you're grieving, and we want to help. We're prepared to offer you a settlement, $2 million, tax-free. All you have to do is sign a non-disclosure agreement and withdraw your claims." Birdie stared at him, her blood boiling. "You think you can buy me?" were trying to help you, Mrs. Matthews. $2 million is life-changing money. You never have to work again. You could take care of your grandchildren, set them up for college. Birdie stepped closer, her voice low and dangerous. My husband is dead. And you think you can make me forget that with a check? Get off my property before I call the police. Caldwell's smile finally faded. You're making a mistake. If you pursue this, we will destroy you. We'll dig into your past, your husband's past, your children's past. We'll find every mistake, every secret, every skeleton in your closet. And we'll make sure the whole world knows. Birdie's voice was ice. Then you better start digging, because I ain't backing down. Caldwell left, but his threat hung in the air like smoke. Marcus, who'd heard everything from the living room, came to the door looking worried. Mama, maybe we should think about this. $2 million? No, Birdie interrupted. Your daddy didn't die so we could get paid to shut up. He died fighting for what was right. And I'm going to finish what he started, no matter what it costs. But the cost came faster than Birdie expected. That evening, a news story broke online. Raymond Matthews, hero or criminal? The article detailed Raymond's past, a DUI arrest from 30 years ago, a gambling problem he'd had in his 20s, a lawsuit from a coworker who claimed Raymond had harassed him. Every mistake, every bad decision, every moment of weakness, all laid out for the world to see. Birdie read the article with tears streaming down her face. She knew about Raymond's past. They'd worked through it together. He'd been young and stupid, and he'd changed. But now, the company was using it to paint him as unreliable, untrustworthy, a liar. They're destroying him, she whispered. Danny sat beside her, reading over her shoulder. They're trying to destroy his credibility so nobody believes the evidence. But it won't work, Birdie. The evidence speaks for itself. Tameka burst through the door, her face furious. Mama, they came after me at work. Somebody called my boss and told him I was unstable, that I was making threats. I got suspended pending an investigation. Marcus came in right behind her. They got me too. Somebody reported me to Child Protective Services, claiming I'm an unfit parent. They're sending a caseworker to inspect my house tomorrow. Birdie felt rage rising in her chest like a tidal wave. They're going after my babies. They're going after my grandbabies. Danny's voice was grim. This is what they do. They isolate you, make you feel like fighting isn't worth it. Birdie stood up, her whole body shaking. Well, they picked the wrong woman to mess with. Call Agent Harper. Tell her what's happening, and then call every news outlet in the city. If they want a war, I'll give them a war. Over the next week, Birdie became a media sensation. She did interviews, held press conferences on her front lawn, showed up at city council meetings demanding action. She brought the photos Raymond had taken, showed them to anyone who would look. Photos of barrels labeled hazardous waste being loaded onto unmarked trucks. Photos of chemicals being dumped into the river under cover of darkness. And slowly, public opinion began to shift. People started paying attention. Environmental groups got involved. Community organizers rallied around Birdie, and the pressure on Midwest Industrial Holdings intensified. But the company wasn't done fighting. One night, Birdie woke to the sound of breaking glass. She ran to the window and saw her car, Raymond's old Buick, the one she'd kept because it smelled like him, engulfed in flames. Marcus called 911 while Tameka pulled Birdie away from the window. By the time the fire department arrived, the car was destroyed. The police took a report but said there was no evidence of who'd done it. But Birdie knew. She knew it was a message, a warning. Stop talking or it'll get worse. That night, sitting in her living room with her children and Danny, surrounded by the smell of smoke and fear, Birdie made a decision. I'm not stopping, she said, her voice steady. They can burn my car. They can threaten my family. They can drag Raymond's name through the mud. But I'm not stopping. Danny looked at her with something like awe. You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Birdie shook her head. I'm just a woman who loved her husband, and I'll be damned if I let him die for nothing. Tameka hugged her mother tight. "We're with you, Mama, all the way." Marcus nodded. "Whatever it takes." And in that moment, surrounded by her family and this man who'd become so important to her, Birdie felt something powerful, not just strength, but purpose. Raymond had started this fight, and she was going to finish it, no matter what. Chapter 6, The Breakthrough. Agent Harper called on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Birdie had first walked into the EPA office. Her voice was urgent. "We've identified the 2 men from the security footage. One of them is Dennis Kowalski, head of security for Midwest Industrial Holdings. The other is Trevor Maddox, a private investigator with a history of intimidation tactics. We're bringing them in for questioning." Birdie's heart raced. "Does this mean you can prove Raymond was murdered?" "We're getting closer, but we need more. We need someone on the inside willing to talk, someone who knows what happened that night." Birdie felt frustration rise. How are we supposed to find someone like that? Agent Harper hesitated. "Actually, someone reached out to us, anonymously. Said they worked at the plant and had information. They're willing to meet, but they'll only talk to you." Birdie's stomach dropped. "Me? Why me?" "They said they trusted Raymond, and they trust you to finish what he started, but Birdie, this could be dangerous. It could be a trap." Birdie didn't hesitate. "When and where?" Agent Harper gave her the details. An abandoned warehouse on the east side, midnight. "We'll have agents positioned nearby," Harper said, "but they want you to come alone. No wire, no backup inside." Danny, who'd been listening on speaker, shook his head. "Absolutely not. You're not going to some abandoned warehouse in the middle of the night by yourself." Birdie looked at him, her expression resolute. "I have to. If this person has information that can prove Raymond was murdered, I have to go." "Then I'm coming with you," Danny said firmly. Birdie started to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He wasn't asking, he was telling him. And part of her, the part that was tired and scared and desperately didn't want to do this alone, was grateful. That night, Birdie and Danny drove to the east side, the city lights fading into darkness as they entered the industrial district. The warehouse was exactly what Birdie had feared, crumbling, isolated, surrounded by abandoned buildings and empty lots. Danny parked a block away, and they approached on foot. Birdie's heart hammered in her chest. Every shadow felt like a threat. Every sound made her jump. "You okay?" Danny whispered. Birdie nodded, even though she wasn't. They entered through a side door, the rusted hinges screaming in protest. Inside, the warehouse was vast and dark, lit only by moonlight filtering through broken windows. "Mrs. Matthews?" A voice echoed from the darkness. Birdie squinted and saw a figure emerge from the shadows. A black man, mid-40s, wearing a plant uniform. He looked terrified. "Who are you?" Birdie asked. The man stepped closer, his hands raised to show he wasn't a threat. "My name is Jerome Hastings. I've worked at the plant for 15 years. I knew Raymond, and I know what happened to him." Birdie felt her breath catch. "Tell me." Jerome's voice shook. "Raymond came to me about a month before he died. He showed me what he'd found, the dump and the cover-up, all of it. He asked me to testify to back him up, but I was scared. I got kids, Mrs. Matthews, a mortgage. I couldn't risk losing my job. So I told him no." His voice broke, and 2 weeks later he was dead. Birdie felt tears streaming down her face. "Did they kill him?" Jerome nodded. "I think so. The day before Raymond died, I saw Kowalski and Maddox corner him in the parking lot. They told him to drop it, to stop asking questions. Said if he didn't, something bad would happen. Raymond told them to go to hell." Jerome pulled a phone from his pocket. "I recorded the whole thing. I was in my car, about to leave, and I saw him. I didn't know what to do, so I just recorded it." He handed the phone to Birdie. "This is the proof you need, their voices, their threats, everything." Birdie took the phone with shaking hands and pressed play. She heard Raymond's voice, strong, defiant, even in the face of danger. "I ain't scared of you. What you're doing is killing people, and I'm gonna stop you." Then Kowalski's voice, cold and menacing. "You're making a mistake, Matthews. Walk away or you won't walk at all." The recording ended. Birdie looked up at Jerome, tears streaming down her face. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" Jerome's voice was thick with guilt. "Because I'm a coward, because I was scared. But I can't live with it anymore. Raymond died trying to do the right thing, and I let him die alone." Danny stepped forward. "You're doing the right thing now. That's what matters." Jerome shook his head. "It doesn't bring him back." "No," Birdie said quietly, "but it'll make sure he didn't die for nothing." They left the warehouse together, Jerome following in his own car. By morning, Agent Harper had the recording, and by afternoon, arrest warrants had been issued for Dennis Kowalski and Trevor Maddox. The news exploded. "Plant security chief arrested in connection with toxic dumping whistleblower's death." Birdie watched the coverage from her living room, surrounded by her family. She felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. It wasn't over yet. There would be trials, testimony, more fights, but this was progress. This was justice beginning to take shape. Danny sat beside her on the couch, and without thinking, Birdie reached for his hand. He squeezed gently, and she felt something warm spread through her chest. Over the past month, this man had become her anchor, her partner in this fight, and somewhere along the way, he'd become more than that. He'd become someone she looked forward to seeing, someone whose presence made her feel less alone. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for staying, for fighting with me." Danny looked at her, his eyes soft. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be." And in that moment, Birdie realized something that both terrified and thrilled her. She was falling for him. It was too soon. Raymond had only been gone 2 months. Her family would talk, people would judge, but she couldn't deny what she was feeling. Danny Sullivan had walked into her life at the worst possible moment, and somehow he'd become the best thing in it. That evening, after her family left, Birdie and Danny sat on the porch, the Detroit summer evening warm and heavy around them. "Can I ask you something?" Birdie said. Danny nodded. "Anything." "Why did you really come to Raymond's funeral? You said you worked different shifts, that you barely knew each other. So why did you come?" Danny was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice low. "Because a week before Raymond died, he came to me, told me he was scared, told me he'd found something that could get him killed, and he asked me if anything happened to him to make sure you knew the truth, to make sure you were protected." He turned to face her. "I came to that funeral because I made him a promise, and because," he paused, his eyes searching hers, "because from everything Raymond told me about you, I knew you were someone worth keeping a promise for." Birdie felt her heart skip. "What did he tell you about me?" Danny smiled. "He said you were the strongest woman he'd ever known, that you'd been his rock for 40 years, that you had a fire in you that nothing could put out. And he was right." Birdie's eyes filled with tears. "I miss him so much." "I know," Danny said gently, "and you always will. But Birdie, Raymond wouldn't want you to stop living. He'd want you to keep fighting, keep loving, keep being the incredible woman you are." Birdie looked at this man, this calm, brave, steady man, and felt something shift inside her, something that felt like the beginning of a new chapter. "Danny Sullivan," she said softly, "I think you might be the second best thing that ever happened to me." Danny's smile was warm. "I'll take second place to Raymond any day." And as they sat there on the porch, hands intertwined, watching the stars come out over Detroit, Birdie felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope, not just for justice, but for a future. A future that included this unexpected man who'd walked into her life and refused to leave. A future that Raymond, wherever he was, would approve of, because love didn't end with death. It just transformed, and Birdie was finally ready to let it. Chapter 7. When family gets complicated. The morning after Birdie realized her feelings for Danny, everything got messy. She woke up to 17 missed calls from Lavonda, her best friend, who'd apparently seen photos of Birdie and Danny on the porch. Photos that some nosy neighbor had taken and posted on Facebook with the caption, "Birdie Matthews and her new white boyfriend, Raymond barely cold, and she already moved on." Birdie stared at her phone, feeling sick. She called Lavonda back. "Girl, people are talking," Lavonda said without preamble. "They saying you and that white man are together. Is it true?" Birdie sat down heavily at her kitchen table. "Lavonda, it ain't like that. Danny's been helping me with the investigation. I seen the pictures, Bird. Y'all was holding hands on the porch, looking all cozy." Birdie felt defensive. "So what if we were? Raymond's been gone 2 months. Am I supposed to be alone forever?" Lavonda's voice softened. "No, baby, you ain't. But people gonna talk. You know how it is. And they gonna talk extra loud because he's white." Birdie felt tears of frustration burn in her eyes. "I don't care what people say." "You should," Lavonda said gently. "Because your kids care, and your grandbaby's gonna hear it at school." Lavonda was right. By noon, Tameka showed up at Birdie's door, her face tight with anger. "Mama, people are saying you're dating that Danny man. Is it true?" Birdie took a deep breath. "Baby, come sit down. Let's talk." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Birdie had raised her children, where they'd done homework and eaten Sunday dinners and celebrated birthdays. Now it felt like a courtroom. "Danny and I are getting close," Birdie admitted. "He's been there for me through all this, and I care about him." Tameka's face crumpled. "Mama, it's only been 2 months since Daddy died. 2 months. How can you even think about being with someone else?" Birdie reached for her daughter's hand, but Tameka pulled away. "Baby, I loved your father more than life itself. For 40 years, he was my everything, but he's gone, and I'm still here, and I don't know how to explain it, but Danny makes me feel less alone." Tameka stood up, tears streaming down her face. "What about Daddy's memory? What about respecting what y'all had?" Birdie's voice broke. "I am respecting it every day, but your father wouldn't want me to spend the rest of my life grieving. He'd want me to be happy." Tameka shook her head. "I can't do this right now. I can't watch you replace Daddy with some white man you barely know." She left, slamming the door behind her. Birdie sat at the table and sobbed. Marcus came by that evening. He was calmer than his sister, but no less concerned. "Mama, I'm not going to tell you what to do. You're a grown woman, but I need you to think about this, about what it looks like, about what people are going to say." Birdie wiped her eyes. "What do you think, baby? Honestly." Marcus sighed. "I think Danny seems like a good man. I think he's been there when we needed him. But I also think it's fast, real fast. And I'm worried you're latching on to him because you're grieving and scared." Birdie considered his words. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I am. But what if it's more than that? What if this is real?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Then you gotta be patient. Give people time to adjust. Give us time to adjust." Birdie nodded. "Okay, I can do that." But being patient was harder than it sounded, especially when Birdie's own heart was screaming at her to hold on to the one good thing in her life right now. That night, Danny called. "I heard what's happening, the talk, your daughter being upset. If you want me to back off, I will." Birdie felt panic rising in her chest. "No, I don't want that. Birdie, I don't want to come between you and your family." "You're not," Birdie insisted. "They're just adjusting. They need time." Danny was quiet for a moment. "I care about you more than I probably should, but I'm not going to be the reason your family falls apart." Birdie felt tears streaming down her face. "Danny Sullivan, you listen to me. My family is strong. We'll figure this out. But I need you to not give up on me. Can you do that?" Danny's voice was warm. "I can do that." They talked for another hour about everything and nothing, and by the time they hung up, Birdie felt a little bit better. But the next morning brought a new problem. Birdie's pastor, Reverend Thompson, called and asked her to come to the church. When she arrived, he was waiting in his office, his face grave. Sister Matthews, I've been hearing some troubling things about you and a man. So, soon after Brother Raymond's passing, Birdie felt her defenses go up. With all due respect, Pastor, my personal life is my business. Reverend Thompson leaned forward. It becomes the church's business when it causes scandal, when it makes people question your character. Birdie stood up, her voice shaking with anger. My character? I've been a member of this church for 30 years. I've tithed when I didn't have money for groceries. I volunteered in the nursery and the soup kitchen and the prison ministry. And now you're questioning my character because I might have feelings for someone? The Reverend's expression didn't change. It's about propriety, Sister Matthews, about respecting your husband's memory, about controlling women, Birdie interrupted. That's what this is really about. Y'all didn't say nothing when Brother Jenkins remarried 6 months after his wife died, but I'm barely 2 months out and you're up in my business. She walked to the door, then turned back. My husband was murdered trying to expose a company that's been poisoning our community. I'm fighting to get justice for him and for everyone they hurt. If y'all want to judge me for finding some comfort in the middle of that, then go ahead. But I'm done apologizing for trying to survive. She left the church feeling both liberated and heartbroken. That evening, Birdie's whole family gathered at her house for what felt like an intervention. Tameka, Marcus, her sister Charlene, her brother-in-law, even her grandkids. They all sat in the living room while Birdie stood in the middle, feeling like she was on trial. Mama, Tameka began, we love you, and we're worried about you. We think you're rushing into something because you're grieving. Birdie looked around at all the faces she loved. Y'all think I don't know that? Y'all think I haven't asked myself 1,000 times if what I'm feeling is real or just me trying to fill a hole? Marcus spoke up. So what's the answer? Birdie sat down, suddenly exhausted. I don't know. Honest to God, I don't know. But what I do know is that Danny Sullivan showed up when I needed someone. He believed me when nobody else did. He fought for Raymond's memory when the rest of the world was trying to tear it down. And yeah, maybe I got feelings for him. Maybe it's too soon. Maybe people gonna talk. But I'm 58 years old, and I just lost the love of my life. If I can find even a little bit of happiness in the middle of all this pain, don't I deserve that? The room was silent. Then her granddaughter Destiny, 14 years old and wise beyond her years, spoke up. Grandma, did Grandpa love you? Birdie's eyes filled with tears, more than anything. And would he want you to be sad forever? Birdie thought about Raymond, about his laugh, about the way he'd always told her to enjoy life, about how he'd made her promise to be strong. No, she whispered. He wouldn't. Destiny nodded. Then maybe it's okay to let yourself be happy. Tameka started crying. Baby, it's not that simple. Why not? Destiny interrupted. Grandma isn't trying to replace Grandpa. She's just trying to survive. And if Mr. Danny helps her do that, why is that bad? Out of the mouths of babes, Birdie thought. The family talked for another hour. And by the end, things weren't completely resolved. But there was understanding, acceptance, or at least the beginning of it. Tameka hugged her mother tight. I'm sorry, Mom, I was being selfish. I just miss Daddy so much. Birdie held her daughter close. I know, baby. I miss him too. Every single day, but missing him doesn't mean I gotta stop living. And as her family left that night, Birdie felt something loosen in her chest. The judgment would continue. People would talk. But her family, her real family, was starting to understand. And that was enough. Chapter 8, The Trial of Truth. The trial of Dennis Kowalski and Trevor Maddox began on a cold November morning 4 months after Raymond's death. The courtroom was packed. Family, reporters, environmental activists, plant workers, and curious onlookers. Birdie sat in the front row, flanked by Tameka and Marcus, with Danny seated directly behind her. His presence was a comfort she'd learned to rely on. The prosecution laid out their case with devastating clarity. The illegal dumping, the cover-up, the threats to Raymond, and finally the evidence that Kowalski and Maddox had confronted Raymond the day before his death, threatening him to stay quiet. Jerome Hastings took the stand, his voice shaking as he recounted what he'd seen and heard. The recording was played for the jury, Raymond's voice strong and defiant, Kowalski's cold and threatening. Several jurors wiped their eyes. Then came the medical expert, a forensic pathologist who'd reviewed Raymond's autopsy at the EPA's request. While the original autopsy listed cause of death as myocardial infarction, a heart attack, there were irregularities that weren't properly investigated, specifically elevated levels of potassium chloride in his system. The prosecutor leaned forward. What would cause that? Potassium chloride is naturally occurring in the body, but at these levels, it suggests injection. It's a common method of inducing cardiac arrest because it's difficult to detect. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Birdie felt like she couldn't breathe. They'd injected Raymond with something, murdered him in a way that looked natural. Tameka grabbed her hand and Birdie squeezed back so hard it must have hurt. The defense fought back hard. They painted Raymond as a disgruntled employee with a history of problems. They suggested the recordings were taken out of context. They brought in their own medical experts who questioned the potassium chloride findings. And they went after Birdie. The defense attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Levine, called Birdie to the stand. Mrs. Matthews, isn't it true that you stand to benefit financially from this case? That you've been contacted by multiple law firms about a wrongful death lawsuit? Birdie kept her voice steady. No, I don't care about money. I care about justice. Levine smirked. Really? Because you've been offered settlements, large ones, and you've turned them down. Why is that? Because my husband didn't die so I could get paid off. He died trying to protect people. Levine paced in front of the jury. Or perhaps he died of natural causes, and you're using this tragedy to go after a corporation you don't like. Birdie's eyes flashed. My husband was murdered, and if you had any decency, you'd admit that instead of protecting the people who killed him. The judge called for order, but Birdie's words hung in the air. For 3 weeks, the trial continued. Witnesses testified, experts argued, evidence was presented and challenged, and through it all, Birdie showed up every single day, sitting in that courtroom, making sure the jury saw Raymond's widow, saw the woman who loved him and lost him, saw the family he left behind. Danny was there every day, too, a quiet presence in the background. During recesses, he'd bring Birdie coffee. During lunch breaks, he'd walk with her outside, letting her vent or cry or just breathe. And at night, when the trial was too much and Birdie felt like she was drowning, he'd sit with her on the porch, holding her hand, reminding her why she was fighting. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known," he'd say, and Birdie would almost believe him. Finally, after 3 weeks, closing arguments came. The prosecutor stood before the jury and painted a picture of greed and murder, of a corporation willing to kill to protect its profits, of Raymond Matthews, a good man who'd stood up to evil and paid with his life. "This isn't just about justice for Raymond Matthews," the prosecutor said. "It's about accountability. It's about saying that in America you can't kill someone to silence the truth." The defense countered with doubt, reasonable doubt, medical uncertainty, circumstantial evidence. "The prosecution wants you to believe a conspiracy theory," Levine said. "But the facts show a man who died of natural causes and a widow who can't accept it." The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 agonizing days where Birdie couldn't eat or sleep or think about anything except those 12 people in a room deciding Raymond's fate. On the 3rd day, the jury came back. Birdie sat in the courtroom, her children on either side of her, Danny behind her, and waited for the verdict that would change everything. On the count of conspiracy to commit murder, how do you find? The forewoman stood. Guilty? The courtroom erupted. Birdie collapsed in her seat, sobbing so hard she couldn't catch her breath. Tameka and Marcus held her while she cried, tears of grief and relief and vindication all mixed together. Kowalski and Maddox were also found guilty of witness intimidation, conspiracy to violate environmental laws, and a host of other charges. They were facing decades in prison, and the corporation, Midwest Industrial Holdings, was facing billions in fines and lawsuits. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Birdie. Microphones were shoved in her face. Questions came from every direction. But Birdie stood tall, her family beside her, and spoke from the heart. Raymond Matthews was a good man, a loving husband, a devoted father and grandfather, and he died trying to protect his community. Today we got justice, but this fight isn't over. There are still people getting sick, still families being poisoned, and I won't stop until every corporation that values profit over people is held accountable. The crowd cheered, and as Birdie walked away from the courthouse, Danny by her side, she felt Raymond's presence, not as a ghost, but as a blessing. "We did it, baby," she whispered. "We got justice." That night, her whole family gathered at her house for a celebration. Food, laughter, relief, and for the first time since Raymond died, Birdie felt like maybe, just maybe, she could start to heal. Danny stayed late, helping clean up after everyone left. They stood in the kitchen, washing dishes side by side, and Birdie felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for believing, for staying, for being here." Danny dried his hands and turned to face her. "Birdie, there's nowhere else I'd rather be. You've become important to me, more important than I ever expected." Birdie felt her heart skip. "Danny, I know it's complicated, I know it's fast, but I can't pretend I don't feel what I feel. I love you, Birdie Matthews, and I know I'm not Raymond. I could never replace him. But if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your future." Birdie's eyes filled with tears. No one had said those words to her since Raymond, and hearing them now from this good, kind man felt like being given permission to live again. "I love you too," she whispered, and Danny kissed her, soft and gentle and full of promise. It was the first kiss since Raymond died, the first time Birdie let herself feel something other than grief, and it felt like coming home. Chapter 9. The question. Nobody expected. 6 months after the trial, Birdie stood in her kitchen making Sunday dinner like she'd done for 40 years. Tameka and Marcus were coming over with the grandkids. LaVonda was bringing her famous mac and cheese. And Danny was coming too. He'd become a fixture in her life, in her family's life. The kids called him Mr. Danny. Her grandchildren climbed all over him, and Tameka and Marcus had slowly, grudgingly come to accept that their mama had found someone who made her happy. The judgment from the community had been harsh at first. Whispers at church, side eyes at the grocery store, comments on social media about how fast Birdie had moved on, and with a white man no less. But Birdie had learned to ignore it. She spent her whole life caring what people thought, and it had never made her happy. So she decided to stop, to live her life on her own terms, to honor Raymond's memory by being happy. Danny arrived early, bringing flowers and wine and that easy smile that made Birdie's heart flutter like a teenager's. They worked side by side in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and talking about everything and nothing, and Birdie marveled at how natural it all felt. "Can I ask you something?" Danny said as he stirred the greens. Birdie looked up from the cornbread she was mixing. "Sure." Danny set down the spoon and turned to face her, suddenly serious. "These past 6 months with you have been the best of my life. After my wife died, I thought I was done. Thought I'd just coast through whatever years I had left. But then I met you, and everything changed." Birdie's heart started to race. Danny! He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Birdie's breath caught. I know it's unconventional. I know people will talk. But I also know that life is short and unpredictable. And when you find something real, you should hold on to it. He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a single diamond. Birdie Matthews, will you marry me? Birdie stared at the ring, her mind reeling. This was crazy. Raymond had only been gone 10 months. People would lose their minds. Her family would have questions. The church would have opinions. But as she looked at Danny, this good, kind, steady man who'd shown up when she needed him most, she realized something. She deserved to be happy. And Danny made her happy. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Danny's face broke into a huge smile, and he slipped the ring on her finger. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. And Birdie felt joy, real, uncomplicated joy, for the first time in almost a year. They decided to tell the family together. When everyone arrived for dinner, Birdie called them all into the living room. Tameka looked concerned. Mama, what's wrong? Birdie took Danny's hand and held it up, showing the ring. Danny asked me to marry him, and I said yes. The room went silent. Marcus was the first to speak. Mama, you sure about this? Birdie nodded. I've never been more sure of anything. Tameka looked like she was going to cry. Mama, it's only been 10 months since Daddy died. Don't you think this is fast? Birdie sat down, pulling Danny down beside her. Baby, I know this is hard. I know it seems fast, but I'm 59 years old. I don't have time to waste on maybes and some days. Danny makes me happy, and I think your daddy would want that for me. Little Destiny piped up. I think it's romantic, like Grandma's getting a second chance at love. Marcus sighed. Mama, people are going to talk. Let them, Birdie said firmly. I spend my whole life worrying about what people think, and it never made me happy, so I'm done. I'm going to live my life. And if people don't like it, that's their problem. Tameka wiped her eyes. Do you love him, Mama? Really love him? Birdie looked at Danny, at his kind face and gentle eyes, and nodded. I do. Not the same way I loved your father. Nobody could ever replace Raymond, but Danny's carved out his own place in my heart. And yes, I love him. Tameka stood and walked over to Danny. You better take care of my mama. You hear me? Danny stood and faced her. I will. I promise you that. Tameka studied him for a long moment. Then she hugged him. Welcome to the family. Marcus followed suit, shaking Danny's hand with a grip that was probably a little too firm. Hurt her, and we'll have problems. Danny smiled. Understood. And just like that, it was done. The family had given their blessing. Now came the hard part, telling everyone else. The news spread through the community like wildfire. Birdie's phone exploded with calls and texts, some congratulatory, many judgmental. LaVonda came over the next morning, her face a mixture of concern and excitement. Girl, is it true? You're really marrying that white man? Birdie poured them both coffee. His name is Danny, and yes, I am. LaVonda sat down hard. Birdie, I love you, you know I do. But Raymond's only been gone 10 months. Don't you think you should wait? Give yourself time to grieve? Birdie's voice was firm. I've been grieving every day since Raymond died, and I'll keep grieving him for the rest of my life. But that doesn't mean I have to be alone. That doesn't mean I can't find happiness again. LaVonda shook her head. People are going to drag you through the mud for this. Let them, Birdie said. I'm tired of living my life according to other people's timelines and expectations. Raymond's gone, and I miss him every single day. But I'm still here, and I deserve to be happy. LaVonda was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took Birdie's hand. You're right. I'm sorry. If Danny makes you happy, then I'm happy for you. Birdie smiled through tears. Thank you. The wedding was planned for 2 months later. Small, simple, just family and close friends. But the backlash was intense. The pastor refused to perform the ceremony at the church. It's inappropriate, he said, disrespectful to Brother Raymond's memory. So Birdie and Danny decided to get married in her backyard, the same place where she and Raymond had hosted countless barbecues and birthday parties and family gatherings. Reverend Thompson's assistant pastor, a young woman named Pastor Simmons, agreed to officiate. Love is love, she said, and God doesn't put timelines on healing. The week before the wedding, Birdie drove to the cemetery. She hadn't been since the trial ended, and she felt guilty about that. She knelt by Raymond's grave and traced his name with her fingers. "Hey, baby," she said softly. "I know you probably already noticed, but I'm getting married to Danny, the man who helped me get justice for you." She paused, tears streaming down her face. "I hope you're not mad. I hope you understand I loved you with everything I had. For 40 years, you were my whole world, but you're gone, and I'm still here. And Danny makes me feel less alone." The wind rustled the leaves, and Birdie smiled through her tears. "I'm gonna take that as a yes." She stayed a little longer, telling Raymond about the wedding plans, about the grandkids, about everything he was missing. And when she finally left, she felt lighter. Like Raymond had given her his blessing, like she had permission to move forward. That night, Danny came over and they sat on the porch, planning their future. "Where do you want to go for the honeymoon?" he asked. Birdie laughed. "Honey, I'm 59 years old. I don't need a honeymoon." Danny grinned. "Everybody needs a honeymoon. What about New Orleans? You always said you wanted to go." Birdie felt tears spring to her eyes. Raymond had promised to take her to New Orleans for their 40th anniversary, but he died before they could go. "Yeah," she said softly, "I'd like that." And as they sat there planning their life together, Birdie realized something. This wasn't about replacing Raymond. This was about honoring him, honoring the love he'd given her, honoring the life he wanted her to have. Because the greatest tribute to the love she'd shared with Raymond was proving that love hadn't died with him. It had just transformed, and now it was big enough to hold both the past and the future, both Raymond and Danny, both grief and joy, and that was okay. That was more than okay. That was living. Chapter 10, The Wedding and the Life. After the morning of the wedding, Birdie woke up in the house she'd shared with Raymond in the bed they'd slept in for 30 years and felt a complicated mix of emotions. Joy, guilt, excitement, grief, all tangled together like yarn. Tameka and Lavonda came over early to help her get ready. They did her hair and makeup, fussing over her like she was a young bride instead of a 59-year-old grandmother. "You look beautiful, Mama," Tameka said, tears in her eyes. Birdie looked at herself in the mirror. She wore a cream-colored dress, simple and elegant, nothing like the big white gown she'd worn when she married Raymond. This was different. She was different. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" Birdie asked quietly. Tameka met her eyes in the mirror. "I think you're doing what makes you happy, and that's all that matters." Lavonda dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "Girl, if you don't marry that man, I will. He's fine for an older white dude." They all laughed, and the tension broke. By noon, the backyard was transformed. White chairs, flowers everywhere. String lights hung between the trees. It was simple, but beautiful. Perfect. Danny stood at the makeshift altar, looking nervous and handsome in a gray suit. His eyes lit up when he saw Birdie walking toward him, Marcus on one side and Tameka on the other. Birdie's heart pounded as she took her place beside Danny, this man who'd become so important to her in such a short time. Pastor Simmons smiled at them both. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Birdie and Danny. This is a celebration of love, not just new love, but enduring love. The kind of love that survives loss and transforms into something beautiful." She looked at Birdie. Birdie, you loved Raymond Matthews for 40 years, and that love doesn't end today. It simply makes room for something new, for Danny Sullivan, who walked into your life when you needed him most and chose to stay. Birdie felt tears streaming down her face. Danny squeezed her hands gently. Pastor Simmons continued, love isn't a finite resource. It grows. It expands. It makes space for joy even in the midst of grief. And that's what we're celebrating today. When it came time for vows, Danny spoke first. Birdie, I met you on the worst day of your life, and I've watched you survive things that would break most people. You fought for justice, you protected your family, and somehow, in the middle of all that pain, you found room in your heart for me. His voice broke. I'm not trying to replace Raymond. I could never do that. But I promise to love you with everything I have, to stand beside you, to be your partner for whatever time we have left. I love you, Birdie Matthews, and I'm honored to be your husband. Birdie wiped her eyes and spoke through tears. Danny Sullivan, you showed up when I needed someone. You believed in me when the world was trying to tear me down. You helped me find justice for Raymond, and somewhere along the way, you became my friend, my partner, my love. She paused, looking out at her family, her children, her grandchildren, all watching with tears in their eyes. Raymond taught me what real love looks like, and because of him, I know what I'm getting with you. A man who shows up, who fights, who stays, and I promise to love you for the rest of my life. Not in spite of Raymond, but because of him, because he taught me how to love well. Pastor Simmons smiled. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Danny, you may kiss your bride. And he did. Gentle and sweet and full of promise. The small crowd erupted in applause, and Birdie felt joy wash over her like sunlight. The reception was exactly what Birdie wanted. Good food, good music, good people. Her grandkids ran around the yard laughing and playing. Marcus gave a toast that made everyone cry. Tameka danced with Danny, whispering something in his ear that made him smile. And Birdie stood in the middle of it all, watching her family celebrate, feeling grateful, feeling blessed, feeling like maybe, just maybe life was going to be okay. That evening, after most of the guests had left, Birdie and Danny stood in the backyard, swaying to music only they could hear. You happy? Danny asked. Birdie looked up at him. Yeah, I am. No regrets? Not a single one. Danny kissed her forehead. Good, because you're stuck with me now. Birdie laughed. I can think of worse fates. They danced until the stars came out, and then they drove to a hotel downtown, the same hotel where Birdie and Raymond had spent their wedding night 40 years ago. It felt right, like closing one chapter and opening another. Over the next year, Birdie and Danny built a life together. They traveled to New Orleans, to Washington, D.C., to places Birdie had always wanted to see, but never had the chance. Danny moved into Birdie's house, and they made it theirs, redecorating and rearranging until it felt like home to both of them. Birdie continued her advocacy work, becoming a spokesperson for environmental justice. She testified before Congress. She spoke at universities. She became a voice for communities being poisoned by corporate greed. And Danny was there every step of the way, her partner in every sense of the word. The judgment from the community slowly faded. Some people never came around. They whispered at church, made comments on social media, treated Birdie like she'd betrayed Raymond's memory. But Birdie learned to live with it, learned that she couldn't control what people thought, could only control how she lived her life. And she chose to live it fully. On what would have been her 41st wedding anniversary with Raymond, Birdie visited his grave. Danny offered to come, but she went alone. She knelt by the headstone and placed fresh flowers. Hey, baby, she said softly. It's been a year since I married Danny, and I need you to know I still love you. I'll always love you. What we had was real and beautiful, and it shaped who I am. She paused, tears streaming down her face. But I'm happy now, really happy, and I hope wherever you are, you're happy for me. The wind rustled the leaves, and Birdie smiled. I'm taking that as a yes. That evening, the whole family gathered at Birdie's house for dinner. Marcus had brought his famous ribs. Tameka made potato salad. The grandkids were loud and messy and perfect. And Danny carved the ribs and made jokes and fit into the family, like he'd always been there. After dinner, little Destiny pulled Birdie aside. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course, baby. Do you miss Grandpa? Birdie's eyes filled with tears. Every single day. But you're happy with Mr. Danny? I am. Destiny nodded, her face serious. Good. Because you deserve to be happy. Birdie pulled her granddaughter into a tight hug. When did you get so wise? Destiny grinned. I learned from the best. That night after everyone left, Birdie and Danny sat on the porch. The same porch where this had all begun. So, you ever think about the title of our story? Birdie asked. Danny smiled. What do you mean? Birdie laughed. I met you at my husband's funeral, and now we're married. If somebody wrote that down, people would say it was crazy, inappropriate, too fast. Danny took her hand. What do you say? Birdie looked at this man, this good, kind man who had walked into her life at the worst possible moment and refused to leave. I say it's the best thing that ever happened to me. After Raymond, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the Detroit skyline light up against the night sky. And Birdie thought about her life, about the girl she'd been when she married Raymond at 18, about the woman she'd become over 40 years of love and partnership, about the widow she'd been, broken and lost at Raymond's funeral, and about the woman she was now, stronger, wiser, still grieving but also healing, still loving but in a different way. She'd met Danny at her husband's funeral. It was the kind of story that made people uncomfortable, that challenged everything society said about grief and moving on and how long you're supposed to wait before letting yourself be happy again. But Birdie didn't care what society said, because she'd learned something through all of this, that love doesn't end with death. It transforms. It makes space for new beginnings without erasing what came before. That grief and joy can exist in the same heart, that you can honor the past while embracing the future, that sometimes the people who save you become the people you build a life with, and that at 59 years old or any age, you deserve to be happy. You deserve to love and be loved. You deserve second chances. What are you thinking about? Danny asked. Birdie smiled. I'm thinking about how lucky I am to have loved Raymond for 40 years, to have you now, to have my family, to have survived everything and come out the other side still standing. Danny pulled her close. We're both lucky. And as they sat there on the porch, two people who'd found each other in the darkest of circumstances and built something beautiful, Birdie felt at peace. She would always carry Raymond in her heart, would always honor his memory, would always tell her grandchildren stories about the man who'd loved their grandmother first, who'd fought for what was right, who'd given his life trying to protect his community. But she would also keep living, keep loving, keep building a future with Danny, because that was what Raymond would have wanted. What he told her in that letter, to be strong, to keep going, to finish what he'd started. And she'd gotten justice for Raymond. She'd exposed the corporation. She made sure his death wasn't for nothing. And in the process, she'd found a way to keep living, to keep loving, to keep being Birdie Matthews, now Birdie Sullivan, grandmother, activist, widow, wife, all of it, all at once. I love you, she whispered to Danny. I love you too, he whispered back. And under the Detroit stars, surrounded by 40 years of memories and infinite possibilities for the future, Birdie closed her eyes and smiled. She'd met him at her husband's funeral, and now they were married. It was unconventional, complicated, unexpected, but it was also real, beautiful, hers, and she wouldn't change a single thing.